Ryan Mitchell grabbed the baseball bat from under his bed heart, slamming against his ribs, and swung it toward the shadow crawling through his second-floor window at midnight, stopping 1 inch from her face. Her face. Victoria Caldwell's face. His CEO. The most powerful woman in the building where he spent 40 hours a week trying to stay invisible. She was bleeding. She was shaking. And she was looking at him like he was the only solid thing left in a world that had just collapsed underneath her. Drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The bat was still in Ryan's hands when he realized he was shaking too. Not from fear. From the pure electric wrongness of what he was seeing. Victoria Caldwell. The woman whose name was on the letterhead of every memo, every performance review, every termination notice he had ever watched. Go Out was halfway through his bedroom window, one leg dangling over the sill, her silk blouse torn at the shoulder, her dark hair loose and wild, in a way he had never seen it in 3 years of working beneath her. He had seen her in boardrooms. He had seen her silence a room full of vice presidents with a single look. He had seen her reduce a grown man to near tears in a quarterly review without raising her voice above a careful, controlled murmur. He had never seen her look like this. Desperate. Cornered. Human. "Don't," she started. "Get off my window." Ryan's voice came out low and controlled, which surprised him, because nothing inside him was either of those things right now. Victoria pulled her other leg through and dropped onto his bedroom floor. She landed harder than she expected. Her heel caught the edge of his laundry basket, and she stumbled, catching herself on his dresser. A framed photograph tipped sideways. She caught it before it fell. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. His daughter. Lily. 7 years old, gap-toothed smile wearing the Little League jersey she had begged Ryan to let her join, even though softball season conflicted with his work schedule, and he had spent 3 weeks rearranging everything to make it happen. Victoria set the photo back upright carefully, like it was something valuable. Then she looked at Ryan. "You can put the bat down." "I'll decide that." She didn't argue. She just stood there breathing hard and let him look at her. There was a cut above her left eyebrow. Not deep enough for stitches, but deep enough to have bled down the side of her face and dried along her jawline in a dark, thin line that she hadn't wiped away. Her jacket was gone. Her blouse was torn. One of her heels was broken, snapped clean off, and she was listing slightly to the left because of it. Ryan had worked for Victoria Caldwell for 3 years. He had learned to read the small signals in her body language that other people missed. The way her jaw tightened when she was holding back something sharp. The way her eyes went very still when someone said something that actually landed. The way she always kept her hands quiet and controlled in a room full of people watching her. Her hands were not quiet now. They were trembling at her sides. And that, more than the broken heel, more than the blood, more than the impossible fact of her standing in his apartment at 11:52 on a Tuesday night, that was what made Ryan lower the bat. Just an inch. Just enough. "Talk," he said. Fast. Victoria glanced toward the window. The curtain shifted in the night breeze, and she flinched, actually flinched, and stepped back from it. "Close that. You just climbed through it. Close it, Ryan, please." He had never heard her say please before. Not once. Not in 3 years. He crossed the room, looked out into the darkness below the narrow alley between his building and the neighboring parking structure. Emptied the streetlight at the far end, flickering like it always did, and pulled the window shut. Locked it. When he turned around, Victoria had moved to the far corner of the room, her back against the wall, watching the window like she expected something to come through it. "You want to tell me what's happening," Ryan said. "Or do you want to keep staring at my window like it personally offended you?" "Someone followed me." Her voice was flat, professional, like she was reporting a quarterly number, but her eyes weren't flat. "From my building. I lost them 3 blocks over, but I couldn't go back. I couldn't go to anyone. She stopped, recalibrated. "I couldn't go anywhere obvious." "So you came here?" "Yes." "To my apartment?" "Yes." "Which you found how exactly?" Something moved across her face. Not quite guilt, Not quite embarrassment, something in between. Employee records. Ryan stared at her. You went into HR records at... He glanced at the clock on his nightstand, midnight, to look up where I live. I had access to them before midnight. She stopped again. I remembered your address, from a file review, several months ago. You remembered my home address. I remember things. That's incredibly unsettling. I know. He looked at her for a long moment. The CEO of Caldwell Meridian Holdings, with a cut on her face and a broken heel, and her back pressed against the wall of his 1,200-square-foot apartment, in a building where the elevator had been broken for the past 3 weeks, and the hallway smelled like someone had made very ambitious curry sometime last Thursday. Sit down before you fall down, he finally said. You're listing. I'm not. Your heel is broken. You're compensating for it, and you've been compensating since you climbed through my window, and your left leg is going to cramp up if you keep standing on it that way. Sit down. Victoria looked at the chair in the corner. Then she looked at him. Then she sat down. Ryan put the bat down, leaning it against the dresser where he could still reach it, because he hadn't lost his mind entirely, and went to the bathroom. He came back with the first aid kit, a damp washcloth, and a glass of water. He set them on the dresser in front of her without ceremony. The cut isn't bad, he said. Press that to it. Victoria took the washcloth and pressed it to her eyebrow. She looked at the first aid kit, the way someone looks at something they are not accustomed to needing. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You still haven't explained why someone was following you. She held the cloth to her head and looked at him with those controlled, careful eyes. How much do you know about what's been happening at the company? I know what I can see from where I sit, Ryan said, which is apparently more than most people think, but probably less than you know. The Q3 reports. Ryan had spent the last 6 weeks quietly uneasy about the Q3 reports. He was a financial analyst. Numbers were his language. And the Q3 numbers had been saying something strange, not loud, not obvious, but strange in the way a song played slightly off-tempo is strange. You couldn't always name what was wrong. You just knew it wasn't right. What about them? Someone altered them. Ryan waited. After I signed off on the originals, Victoria said. Someone went back into the system, changed figures in the subsidiary reports. Not enough to trigger an automatic audit flag. Enough to make it look like I had approved falsified numbers. Why would anyone? Because the board has been looking for a reason, Victoria said quietly. There are 3 members who have wanted my father's seat at that table since before I took over. They have been patient enough to wait for an opportunity. And now someone has given them one. Ryan sat on the edge of his bed. He thought about the Q3 numbers. He thought about the specific files he had been asked to compile last month, a routine request he had assumed from the Financial Oversight Committee. A cross-reference of subsidiary accounts against the parent company ledger. Routine. But the request had come with a deadline that was unusual. End of business, same day. And it had come directly from Jeffrey Marsh's office. Jeffrey Marsh, board member, 30-year veteran of his father's company. A man who had looked at Victoria Caldwell for the past 4 years, like she was a tenant in a house he was patiently waiting to inherit. Marsh, Ryan said. Victoria's eyes sharpened. What do you know about Marsh? I know he requested a specific financial cross-reference last month through my department. I know the deadline was strange. I know I flagged it internally because the request bypassed the normal approval chain, and I thought it was sloppy process management. Ryan paused. I didn't think it was deliberate. Did you keep a record of the request? I keep records of everything. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Something that might on a different face have looked like relief. Of course you do, she said almost to herself. Why were you followed tonight? I went to the server room. Victoria lowered the washcloth. The bleeding had stopped. We have a backup archive not connected to the main network physical records going back 7 years. I wanted to pull the original Q3 files before they could be touched. Someone was watching the server room. I didn't see them until I was coming out. She looked at the window again. I ran. I cut through the parking structure. I lost them, but I didn't know how many there were, or if anyone was waiting at my building or my car. So you ran to your employee's apartment. I ran to the only person in that company who has ever told me I was wrong. Ryan went very still. That was not what he had expected her to say. At the Hargrove presentation, Victoria continued, 14 months ago, you stood up in a room with 6 vice presidents, and you told me my acquisition model was flawed. Do you remember what I said to you? Ryan remembered exactly what she had said. You told me I could either trust your model or clear out my desk. Yes. And I told you that if you fired me for being right, you'd lose $37 million in the first 18 months. And I nearly did fire you. I know. And then I didn't. I noticed. And then, Victoria said carefully, you were right. About everything. And you never said a word about it to anyone. You never leveraged it. You never used it to negotiate a promotion, or throw it in my face, or brief against me to the VPs who would have loved to hear it. You just... She paused. You went back to your desk, and you kept doing your job. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was trying to stop the company from making a mistake. I know. That's why I'm here. The apartment was quiet. Down the hall he could hear the small familiar sounds of Lily sleeping, the occasional creak of her bed, the hum of the fan she needed to sleep even in winter. Ryan thought about that. He thought about his daughter down the hall. He thought about the fact that his CEO was sitting in his bedroom with dried blood on her face, and a broken heel, and a story that was either the truth or the most elaborate and terrifying manipulation he had ever encountered. He thought about the Q3 numbers. The way they had been wrong in a way that was too careful, too specific to be accidental. He thought about Jeffrey Marsh and his same-day deadline. How much did you get out of the server room? Victoria reached into her jacket, the inside pocket where she had apparently been carrying something this whole time, and pulled out a slim USB drive. Everything I had physical copies of. The original signed reports. The discrepancy logs that show the changes were made after my signature timestamp. It's not complete, but it's enough to show the pattern. That's not going to be enough on its own. I know. You need the request records, the system access logs showing who went into those files after you signed off. I know. And you need someone who can pull those records without alerting whoever is watching the system. I know, Ryan. He looked at the USB drive in her hand. Then he looked at his daughter's photograph on the dresser. Then he looked at Victoria Caldwell. Powerful, exhausted, frightened, and sitting in a folding chair in his bedroom, like the entire architecture of her life had just begun quietly falling apart. This is going to make things complicated for me, he said. I know, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just tell me the truth, all of it, from the beginning. Victoria looked at him for a moment, and then she did something Ryan had never seen her do in 3 years. She put the USB drive on the dresser. She folded her hands in her lap. And she started talking like someone who had run out of the energy required to be anything other than honest. She had taken over Caldwell Meridian Holdings 4 years ago when her father's health made it necessary. She had walked into the role knowing the board didn't want her there, not because she was unqualified, but because she was her father's choice, and several of those men had spent decades working around her father's authority and weren't prepared to transfer their deference to his daughter. She had spent 4 years proving herself. 4 years of perfect decisions, or near perfect, she said, which Ryan appreciated more than she probably knew, and relentless work, and not a single moment of personal life that she hadn't sacrificed to the company. She had no close friends in the office. She couldn't afford them. Closeness meant information, and information meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the men waiting at her perimeter had something to use. She had learned to keep everyone at the exact right distance. Not hostile, not cold, just managed. You're not cold, Ryan said. Victoria stopped. Everyone thinks you're cold, he said. But you're not. You're controlled. There's a difference. She looked at him like he had said something in a language she recognized but hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. Most people don't distinguish between the two. Most people aren't paying attention. She was quiet for a moment. The man who has been feeding information to the board, she said. His name is Carter Lane. He was my father's personal assistant for 11 years. When my father's health declined, Carter transitioned into a role as an internal compliance consultant. He has access to nearly every system in the building. Access I approved. She paused. Because I trusted him. Because he was one of the few people who seemed to genuinely mourn when my father got sick. He cried at the hospital. She stopped. I thought that meant something. You thought it meant he was loyal. He was performing grief. He was performing loyalty. He has been feeding Marsh and his allies information for at least 2 years, possibly longer. And I didn't see it because She pressed her lips together. Because I wanted to believe there was at least one person in that building who was there for the right reasons. Ryan was quiet. So Marsh has access to internal information through Lane, he said. Lane has been manipulating financial records to create evidence against you, and the board is going to use that evidence to push you out. At the emergency meeting on Thursday. Ryan looked up. Thursday, as in, day after tomorrow. Yes. They moved it forward. I found out tonight, which is part of why I went to the server room. What happens at the meeting? They present the altered Q3 reports as evidence of financial mismanagement. They call for an emergency vote on my position, and without evidence to counter the reports. She stopped. My father built that company. He spent 40 years building it, and these men are going to dismantle it the moment they have the seat. They don't want to run it. They want to liquidate the assets. Victoria looked at him sharply. How do you know that? Because I've been watching the acquisition language in the internal memos for the last 8 months, and it's been trending in one direction. They're not interested in the company. They're interested in the real estate holdings and the subsidiary portfolio. Ryan paused. I didn't know why until now. Victoria stared at him. You've been watching the acquisition language. I'm a financial analyst. You work in mid-level reporting. Yes. You have no reason to be tracking board-level acquisition strategy. No official reason, but the numbers tell a story, whether anyone's asking you to listen or not. And the story I've been watching for 8 months is a board that doesn't care about the company's future. It only cares about the fastest way to convert its assets into cash. Victoria was looking at him like she was recomputing something she thought she had already finished calculating. You knew something was wrong. I knew something was off. I didn't know who. I didn't know the shape of it. I just knew the numbers were pointing somewhere I didn't like. Why didn't you report it? To who? The board? The same board that apparently owns the problem, or up the chain to compliance where you just told me Carter Lane has been sitting for 2 years. Ryan shook his head. Sometimes you keep information until you understand what you have. Otherwise, you just hand someone a weapon and hope they're pointing it in the right direction. Victoria was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car passed on the street below. The curtain shifted. Her eyes went to it and came back. You've been sitting on this information alone, she said. It wasn't information. It was a feeling, a pattern. I didn't have enough to do anything with it. But you were waiting. I was watching. For what? Ryan thought about that. For the moment, it became something I could actually use. Victoria looked at him across the room. The careful, managed executive was still there. Ryan could see the discipline in her posture, the way she held herself even now, even exhausted. But something else was visible too. Something underneath the discipline that was very tired and very real. I don't know how to do this, she said. I don't know how to... She stopped. Started again. I'm very good at operating within structure. I know the rules of the game I've been playing for 4 years. But this... She looked at her hands. I came to you because you were the only person I could think of who might actually help. And that is a very strange thing for me to admit. You mean because I'm your employee? I mean because I've been surrounded by people for 4 years and I ran to a near stranger's apartment in the middle of the night because it felt like the only safe place. She looked up. That's a strange thing to sit with. Ryan thought about the night Lily was born. The way the hospital had been full of people, nurses, doctors, the sound of machines, and he had never felt more alone in his life because the one person who should have been there had decided 8 months into the pregnancy that this wasn't the life she wanted after all. And he had looked at his daughter for the first time with no one beside him, and thought you are going to be the bravest thing I have ever done. I hadn't said that to anyone. Not once. Some things you just carry. It's not that strange, he said. Sometimes the only safe place is the one that has nothing to lose by keeping you safe. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Your daughter, is she? She's asleep. She won't hear any of this. She sleeps like a stone. She's 7. 8 in March. You're raising her alone. Yes. That must be. Victoria stopped. Started again in a different direction. Does she know what you for work? She knows I work with numbers and that I fight bad guys with math. Something moved across Victoria's face. Something that in better light might have been the beginning of a smile. She's not wrong. I know. I told her exactly that. The apartment was quiet again. Somewhere outside the late-night city was doing its late-night things, a bus, the distant sound of music from the bar 2 blocks over, the specific silence that belongs to the hours when most of the world has finally stopped moving. Ryan looked at the USB drive on the dresser. I need to see what you pulled, and I need to pull the access logs from my department's server archive. We maintain a secondary local backup that isn't connected to the main compliance network. Carter Lane doesn't know it exists. It was a contingency setup from the old system that never got fully migrated. You're saying there's a record Lane can't touch. I'm saying there might be a record. I need to check. If that record shows the access timestamps, then we have someone entering the financial system after your signature, and we have Jeffrey Marsh's request to my department as a frame. Ryan was already running the sequence in his head. It's not airtight, but it's enough to create reasonable doubt. Enough to slow the board meeting down, enough to force an external audit. An external audit would take months, and during that time no vote, no removal, no asset liquidation. He looked at her. It buys time. Time is what you need right now. Victoria stared at him. You have it all laid out already. I've been thinking about the wrong shape of the problem for 8 months. Now that I know the right shape, it comes together quickly. How do we do this without tipping them off? Carefully, and before Thursday. Ryan. Victoria leaned forward slightly. If this goes wrong, if they find out you helped me, they will come after you. Not professionally. These men have resources, and they have patience, and they do not forget. I want you to understand that. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Lily's college fund, which existed in theory, and a spreadsheet, and approximately $4,200 in a savings account he contributed to whenever he had anything left at the end of the month. He thought about his job, his desk, his routine. The 3 years he had spent keeping his head down and his work clean and his name far from any drama that didn't belong to him. I thought about the Q3 numbers that had been whispering to him for 6 weeks that something was wrong. He thought about the fact that he had spent his entire adult life making decisions based on what was right, even when it was inconvenient, even when it cost him something. Because Lily was watching everything he did, whether she knew it or not, and the story he was going to leave her with wasn't going to be your father saw something wrong and looked away. I know the risk, he said. I'm serious, Ryan. So am I. He stood up. I'm going to make coffee. We're going to go through what you have on that drive, and then we're going to figure out how to pull the access logs without setting off any flags. And we're going to do all of that before 6 a.m. because my daughter wakes up at 6:15 and she cannot walk in on her father having a secret planning session with his CEO. Victoria looked at him. Then she looked down at the broken heel of her shoe. I appear to need different shoes. I appear to have approximately 0 women's shoes in this apartment. I noticed. I have an old pair of running shoes, size 9. They will look ridiculous, but they're better than limping. I'll take them. Ryan went to the closet, pulled out the shoes, handed them over. Victoria looked at them. Navy blue with a white sole, worn at the toes, about as far from her usual heels as it was possible to get. She took them without comment and put them on. They were slightly too big. She stood up. She crossed to the dresser and picked up the USB drive. I know you don't owe me anything, she said. I know I've been... She seemed to choose the word carefully. Difficult, as a manager. You've been demanding. That's generous. You've also been right more often than anyone gives you credit for, and the company is still standing because of decisions that were genuinely good, that no one remembers because they were looking for you to fail. Ryan picked up his coffee mug. I have been paying attention, Victoria. That goes in all directions. She looked at him for a moment. Really looked at him. My father, she said slowly, used to say that the most dangerous person in any room was the one who was quiet and watching, because by the time you noticed them, they already understood everything. Smart man. He was. She looked at the photograph of Lily again. He would have liked your daughter. He had a weakness for gap-toothed smiles. Ryan looked at the photo. Then he looked at the clock. 12:31 a.m. Thursday was coming, and between now and then, everything was going to depend on numbers timing and a secondary server archive that no one in power knew existed. Ryan Mitchell poured 2 cups of coffee in his small kitchen in his small apartment in the unremarkable building that had somehow inexplicably become the place where everything was about to change. He brought 1 cup to Victoria. She took it with both hands. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Okay, Ryan said. He sat down at his kitchen table and opened his laptop. Show me what you pulled. Victoria sat down on across from him. Outside the city hummed. A bus passed. The streetlight at the end of the alley kept flickering, the way it always did, the way it would keep doing long after this night was over. Inside 2 people, who barely knew each other, who had spent 3 years on opposite sides of a professional distance that neither of them had questioned, bent their heads over a screen and began the careful, meticulous, dangerous work of making sure the truth survived until Thursday. Somewhere down the hall, Lily Mitchell slept with her fan running and her softball glove on the nightstand, and no idea at all that her father was in the next room doing something that would change both of their lives. She would find out later, and she would be, as Ryan always hoped, she would be exactly what he had raised her to be. Proud. The coffee had gone cold before either of them noticed. Ryan had stopped drinking his somewhere around the 3rd file on the USB drive, and Victoria had stopped drinking hers sometime after that, and now both cups sat on the kitchen table, like forgotten punctuation, while the 2 of them stared at a screen that was telling a story neither of them wanted to be true. The drive contained 41 files. Financial reports, internal memos, signature logs, and a series of server access records that Victoria had managed to pull from the physical archive before she ran. Ryan had opened them in order the way he always worked, not fast, not rushed, but with the specific kind of focused patience that his old accounting professor had called the discipline of letting the numbers speak before you decide what they're saying. How was 20 files in when he stopped? He went back. He opened the same file twice, looked at it the same way both times, and then sat back in his chair and pressed both hands flat on the table. Tell me about the Ardmore subsidiary, he said. Victoria leaned in. Ardmore Capital is a holding entity, created 8 years ago to manage a specific set of real estate investments in the Mid-Atlantic portfolio. Small operation. Quiet. Who controls it? Technically the board. It predates my tenure. My father created it as a tax vehicle. Does anyone actively manage it? Carter Lane has administrative oversight. He took it over 2 years ago from the previous compliance director when she retired. Ryan turned the laptop so Victoria could see the screen directly. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. The Ardmore subsidiary ledger showed a series of internal transfers, small amounts individually, unremarkable, spread across 14 months. Each one routed through a different holding account before landing in a third-party investment vehicle that Ryan had tracked 3 layers deep before finding the name attached to it. The name was not Jeffrey Marsh. It was his son-in-law. He's been extracting capital, Ryan said. Not enough at any single point to trigger a flag, but consistent, patterned, over 14 months. He pulled up a second file beside the first. And the Q3 alterations, the ones designed to make you look responsible for the discrepancy, they happen to overlap almost perfectly with the period when these transfers accelerate. Victoria's jaw was tight. He needed a scapegoat before anyone looked at the outflow. He needed the investigation pointed at you before anyone thought to look at Ardmore. Because if someone looked at Ardmore, they'd find the transfers. And if they found the transfers, they'd find his son-in-law. And if they found his son-in-law, they'd find Marsh. And 14 months of quiet, careful theft from a company he was supposed to be protecting. The kitchen was very still. Victoria sat back in her chair. She put both hands around her cold coffee cup and held it without drinking it like she needed something to hold on to. "He's not just trying to remove me," she said. "He's been using the company as a personal fund for over a year. The board vote the asset liquidation strategy, all of it is cover. If they break up the company, Ardmore goes with it. The transfers disappear into a liquidation ledger and nobody ever looks back. Because dead companies don't get audited with the same scrutiny as live ones. No, they don't." Ryan closed the files. Opened his own system, his personal laptop separate from his work machine, and navigated to a directory that lived 3 folders deep under a label so boring that no one had ever opened it uninvited. Project Archive Legacy Migration Unresolved. Inside, it was the secondary server backup he had mentioned. The one that had never been fully migrated into the main compliance network. The digital equivalent of a filing cabinet that had been shoved in a back office and forgotten by everyone except the person who put it there. Ryan had put it there, not intentionally at first. It had been a routine part of a system transition project 2 years ago. His job had been to migrate financial records from the old local servers to the new cloud-based compliance system, and 94% of the files had transferred cleanly. The remaining 6% had flagged for manual review, and Ryan had been in the middle of processing them when the project was abruptly deprioritized and reassigned to a different team. The backup had never been deleted. It had just sat there. And because Ryan was the kind of person who never deleted anything he didn't fully understand, yet he had left it alone. He opened the access logs. He searched by date range the 6-week window surrounding the Q3 reporting period. The results loaded. Ryan read through them once, then again. Then he pulled up the signature timestamp from Victoria's Q3 sign-off and held the 2 sets of data side by side. "There," he said quietly. "There it is." Victoria leaned forward. The log showed a system access event. Someone had entered the Q3 subsidiary files. The timestamp was 11:17 p.m., 4 days after Victoria's official sign-off. After business hours. After any legitimate reason existed to be in those files. The user ID attached to the access event was a system account. Not a personal login. A generic administrative credential that should have required special authorization to use. "Can you trace the administrative credential?" Victoria asked. "Already on it." Ryan was typing. Administrative credentials like this one get issued by IT, but the authorization request, the paperwork that approves someone to use it, that goes through compliance. Carter Lane requested authorization for this credential 18 months ago. Reason given on the request form. Ryan found it routine system maintenance access for compliance auditing. Routine. Very boring. Exactly the kind of request that gets approved in 60 seconds and forgotten immediately. Victoria exhaled slowly. He planned this 18 months ago. At least, maybe longer. The credential is the key that opens the door. The Ardmore transfers start 14 months ago. He spent 4 months after getting the credential setting up the infrastructure before he started moving money. And then the Q3 alteration was the final piece. The final piece. Point the board at you. Create enough chaos that the vote goes through. Company breaks up. Ardmore disappears. Marsh and Lane walk away clean. Ryan paused. "It's actually a very good plan." Victoria looked at him. "You sound almost admiring." "I'm a financial analyst. I can recognize elegant construction even when I hate what it's building. Can we stop it?" Ryan looked at the screen. He looked at the timestamp. He looked at the credential authorization request with Carter Lane's name on it, sitting in a backup archive that no one alive knew existed except for him. "We can stop it," he said. "But we need to be very careful about how. Tell me, if we go directly to the board with this, Marsh controls the agenda. He controls who sees what and when. He'll find a way to slow it down. Discredit the source question, the chain of custody on the data. So we don't go to the board first. We go to the external auditor, The one your father appointed when he set up the company's governance charter. The independent oversight position. Victoria went still. Margaret Holt. You know her. I haven't spoken to her in 4 years. She was my father's choice. The board has been slowly defunding her oversight role since I took over, not eliminating it, because that would require a charter amendment, but making it difficult enough that she mostly operates independently and doesn't get involved in day-to-day decisions. Exactly, which means she's independent. She's not in Marsh's pocket. She has the charter authority to freeze board actions pending an audit review. And if we bring her this, Ryan gestured at the screen, before Thursday's meeting, she has the power to halt the vote. She'd have to move fast. Yes, which is why we're doing this tonight instead of sleeping. Victoria looked at Ryan for a moment. The exhaustion was still in her face, the kind that didn't come from one night, but from 4 years of keeping everything together by sheer force of will. But underneath it, something else was happening. Something that looked to Ryan like the specific clarity that comes to a person when they have finally stopped running and started fighting. Margaret won't trust a package of documents that appears out of nowhere, Victoria said. No, she'll want context. She'll want the chain of custody explained. She'll want to understand where the backup archive came from and why it's credible. She'll want to talk to you directly. Probably, I can do that. Ryan. Victoria looked at him with those careful, serious eyes. I want to be clear about what I'm asking of you. Going to Margaret Holt with this information, it puts you on record. It makes you a witness. If this goes the way I think it will, you will be called into formal proceedings. Your name will be attached to this, and the people we're working against are serious people who don't forgive quickly. You told me that already. I'm telling you again, and I'm telling you again, I understand the risk. Ryan held her gaze. But let me tell you something else. I have a daughter down that hall who is going to grow up watching how I handle the moments that actually matter. And every choice I make is either building the person I want her to see, or it isn't. He paused. I'm not walking away from this because it's inconvenient. That's not the story I'm telling. Victoria was quiet for a long time. Your daughter is lucky, she finally said, to have someone who thinks about her that way. She's the reason I think about anything at all. Outside, the city had gone fully quiet that particular 2 a.m. silence, where even the night sounds thin out, and the world feels very small and very specific. Ryan's apartment. The kitchen table. The laptop screen. 2 people and a problem and a shrinking window of time. I need to print these files, Ryan said. Hard copies, 3 sets. 1 for Margaret Holt, 1 to keep here, 1 that goes somewhere. Neither of us knows about a safety copy, in case anything happens to the first 2. Where do you print at 2 a.m.? 24-hour pharmacy 2 blocks over. Self-service machine. Cash. No account login. He paused. I've had to print Lily's school forms at 2 in the morning more than once. You learn where the options are. Something moved across Victoria's face at that. Something quiet. Go, she said. I'll stay and organize these files while you're gone. I know the structure of the company documents. I can flag the most critical pieces, so you're not walking into Holt with 100 pages she has to sort through herself. Ryan looked at her. You've done this before. Compiled evidence packages. I've been preparing for someone to come after me for 4 years, Victoria said. I just didn't know when or who or exactly how. I've had versions of this document preparation in my head for a long time. She paused. I just always thought I would be doing it alone. Ryan grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. His keys. His wallet. He stopped with his hand on the door. The files I pull from the archive tonight, I'm going to put them on a second drive, when I get back, before we assemble the Holt package. Good. And I'm going to email myself an encrypted copy, personal account, not the company one. Also good. And I'm going to write a summary document, a plain language narrative, that explains the full sequence of events in terms a non-financial person can follow. Because if this goes to a legal proceeding, the judge is not going to be a financial analyst. Victoria looked at him. You're already thinking 3 steps ahead. I'm thinking about what happens if everything goes wrong, Ryan said. Because the only way to be ready for everything going right is to be ready for everything going wrong first. He opened the door. The hallway was empty. The overhead light, which the building management had promised to fix for 6 weeks, was doing its usual half-hearted flicker. He was 3 steps down the hall when Victoria's voice came through the open door. "Ryan?" He stopped. "Thank you. I know that's—" She seemed to search for what she wanted to say. "I know that's not sufficient, but I don't have a better word right now." "You can find a better word later," he said. "Right now, I need to go print documents." He walked to the stairwell at the end of the hall, the one he always took because the elevator was broken, and went down the stairs 2 at a time into the night. He walked the 2 blocks to the pharmacy, with his jacket pulled against the cold, his mind already running ahead, sorting and prioritizing. The access logs, the Ardmore transfers, the credential authorization, the Q3 timestamp discrepancy, the son-in-law account. 14 months, 18 months. 4 years of a woman holding a company together while the people around her quietly planned to take it apart. He printed 3 copies of everything. He paid cash. Howe was back in his apartment by 2:44 a.m. Victoria had organized the files on his kitchen table into a sequence that was Ryan had to admit exactly the order he would have chosen himself. She had flagged 6 documents with sticky notes from the pad he kept by the phone, color-coded with brief annotations in handwriting that was precise and very small. The handwriting of someone who had spent years distilling complex things into as few words as possible. "You annotated them," he said. "The 3 most important pieces need to lead the package. The credential authorization is the strongest single document because it shows premeditation. The Ardmore transfer pattern is the second because it shows motive. The Q3 timestamp comparison is third because it shows execution." She looked at the table. "Everything else is supporting structure, important, but not what you lead with." "That's exactly how I'd build it." "I know. That's why I did it that way." Ryan sat down, pulled his laptop over, and started writing the narrative summary. His fingers moved fast and steady. He had always been faster at writing than most people expected, because he thought in structured sequences, and writing was just sequencing made visible. Victoria read over his shoulder as he wrote. She corrected 2 dates, adjusted 1 figure, and pointed out a section where the causal chain needed 1 more explanatory sentence to be clear to a non-specialist reader. She was good at this. She was very good at this. Ryan kept writing. They worked without speaking much, not because there was nothing to say, but because the work itself was the thing that mattered right now, and both of them understood that without having to discuss it. There was a specific kind of trust in that, the kind that doesn't announce itself. At 3:30 a.m., Ryan's phone buzzed on the table. They both looked at it. Unknown number. Ryan stared at the screen for 2 full seconds. Then he picked it up and answered. Silence on the line. Then a voicemail, flat, deliberate. "You should mind your own business, Mitchell." The call ended. Ryan set the phone down very carefully. Victoria was looking at him. "Someone knows you're involved. Someone knows I exist in this situation. They don't know what I have or how far along we are." Ryan looked at the phone like it was a math problem with a solution he hadn't reached yet. "If they knew what we actually had, they wouldn't be making phone calls. They'd be moving faster. Unless the call is designed to make you stop before you do have something, then they're too late." Ryan picked up the narrative summary, flipped to the last page, and started writing again. By about 2 hours. Victoria looked at the phone, then at Ryan. Then she reached across the table and turned his phone face down, a small, decisive gesture. "Keep going," she said. Ryan kept going. By 4 a.m., the package was complete. 31 pages, 3 full sets. The narrative summary up front, the flagged documents in the sequence. Victoria had built the access logs and timestamps in an appendix, the plain language explanation of the Ardmore transfer structure at the end. Ryan held one set in his hands and paged through it slowly. It was clean. It was tight. It was the kind of document that didn't need anyone to perform outrage on its behalf, because the facts performed it themselves. The numbers said what they said, the timestamps said what they said, and anyone who read it carefully would understand exactly what had happened and exactly who had done it. "This is good," he said. "It's better than good." Victoria was looking at her own copy. It's complete. It doesn't leave a gap for interpretation. Margaret Holt needs to receive this before 9 a.m. Her office opens at 8:30. I know her assistant's email personal contact, not the company directory. If I send directly to the assistant tonight with a request for an urgent morning meeting marked from me personally, she'll see it first thing. Do it from a personal account, not your company email. I know. Victoria had her phone out already. I'm going to include a brief personal note. Margaret knew my father. If I write to her as, she paused, as his daughter, not as the CEO, she'll take it seriously. Write it that way. Victoria wrote it. They sat in the kitchen in the quiet of very early morning, the stack of documents between them. The city outside, starting to make the first faint sounds of a world, getting ready to be the day again. A garbage truck somewhere distant. The first bus of the morning, running a route 2 streets over. Lily's fan hummed down the hall. Ryan looked at the clock. 4:17 a.m. You should sleep, he said. A few hours. The couch isn't great, but it's better than what you've been doing. I don't sleep easily. Neither do I. But Lily wakes up at 6:15 and we both need to be functional for whatever today becomes. 2 hours is better than none. Victoria looked at the stack of documents. What if they move before we can get to Holt? They don't know what we have. They made one phone call at 3:30 in the morning, which tells me someone knows I'm tangentially involved, but doesn't know in what capacity. If they had real intelligence on our position, they'd be doing more than calling my phone. The call scared you. It wasn't a question. Ryan didn't answer it like one. It reminded me that this is real, he said. That's different from being scared. Victoria looked at him for a moment. When I hired you 3 years ago, she started. You didn't hire me. HR hired me. You approved the roster. When I approved you, she corrected without missing a beat. Your file had a note from your previous manager. It said, and I'm quoting from memory, Mitchell is good at his job, but occasionally difficult due to excessive opinions about the correct way to do things. Ryan looked at her. You read my hiring file. I read every file. You read every employee file. I read every file for every person in every department that reports to me. Yes, I always have. My father did the same thing. She looked at the table. The note from your previous manager bothered me initially. I thought it meant you were a troublemaker. And then the Hargrove presentation happened, and you stood up in front of 6 vice presidents and told me I was wrong. And I thought, she paused. I thought that is a person who isn't afraid of the right thing, even when it costs him. Ryan was quiet. I was afraid, he said. For the record, I just did it anyway. That's the only kind of courage that counts, Victoria said. The other kind, the kind where people aren't afraid, that's just recklessness. Ryan looked at her across the kitchen table. 3 years. 3 years of professional distance, of quarterly reviews and hallway acknowledgments and meetings where he had sat 15 chairs away from her and thought of her as a category rather than a person. And here in the middle of the night, over a stack of documents that might save her company and ruin both of their lives if they got it wrong, he was looking at the actual person. Not the CEO. The person. Get some sleep, he said. Couch is through there. Blankets in the cabinet next to the bookshelf. Ryan? 2 hours. Then we're on. Victoria looked at him for one more moment. Then she picked up her phone, the USB drive, and the copy of the document package marked with her initials on the corner. She stopped in the doorway. The note from your previous manager, she said. The one that called you difficult. What about it? I kept it in your file, but I wrote a note underneath it. She turned to look at him. It said, this one pays attention. Watch him. She went to the couch. Ryan sat at his kitchen table for a long time after listening to the city wake up outside his window, thinking about all the ways a person could stand next to someone for 3 years and never actually see them. I thought about the phone call. About Jeffrey Marsh sitting somewhere comfortable and powerful, pulling threads he thought were invisible. About Carter Lane, who had learned to cry at the right moments, and had used that skill for 14 months to steal from a dying man's company. He thought about his daughter sleeping down the hall. He opened his laptop one more time. He checked the access log backup. He checked the encrypted email copy he had sent to his personal account. He checked the document package. Everything was where he left it. Everything was real. He set the laptop aside. He looked at the clock. 4:51 a.m. In about an hour and a half. Lily would wake up, and she would want breakfast, and she would want to tell him about the dream she almost certainly had. She always had dreams. Elaborate, detailed ones that she described over cereal in the specific run-on grammar of an 8-year-old who has more story than patience, and he would sit across from her and listen the way he always did. And she would not know any of this. She would just see her father at the breakfast table, and that Ryan thought it was exactly how it should be. He got up, checked the locks on both the front door and the bedroom window, turned off the kitchen light, and sat in the dark for the remaining hour and 20 minutes until morning came. He didn't sleep, but he wasn't afraid. Lily woke up at 6:17 a.m. 2 minutes later than usual and came padding into the kitchen in her softball socks and the oversized t-shirt she used as pajamas, the one with the faded logo of a minor league team Ryan had taken her to see 2 summers ago. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. She looked at her father, who was sitting at the table with a cold cup of coffee and the specific expression of someone who had not slept. She looked at the woman on the couch, who was also awake. Ryan didn't think Victoria had slept either not really sitting upright with the blanket folded neatly across her lap and her eyes open and her hands still. Lily looked at Ryan. "Dad?" "Morning, Bug. There's a lady on our couch." "There is. Did she sleep there?" "For a little while." Lily considered this with the thorough, unsentimental logic of an 8-year-old evaluating new information. "Does she work with you?" "She does." "Is she in trouble?" Ryan looked at his daughter. He had always been amazed by how directly she moved to the center of a thing. He had no idea if that was something he had taught her or something she had simply arrived with factory installed. "She needed a safe place to be last night," Ryan said. "So she came here." Lily turned to look at Victoria directly with the unfiltered assessment of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't looking. "Are you okay now?" Victoria looked at the girl. Something moved through her face, something that wasn't the executive expression, and wasn't the frightened expression from the night before, but something different, something quieter. "I'm working on it," Victoria said. "Thank you for asking." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and went to the cabinet for the cereal. "Dad, we're out of the good kind." "We're not out. It's behind the oatmeal." The sound of cabinet rearranging. Then the sound of a bowl. "Do you want cereal?" Lily called out without turning around, addressing Victoria with the casual generosity of someone who had been raised to offer. Victoria blinked. She paused. "Yes, please, thank you." And that was how Victoria Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Meridian Holdings, found herself sitting at a kitchen table at 6:20 in the morning, eating off-brand Honey Nut cereal across from an 8-year-old who wanted to tell them both about a dream she'd had involving a talking horse that was also somehow her school principal. Ryan sat between them and drank his cold coffee and listened to his daughter talk. And for exactly 12 minutes, he let himself be present in the ordinary, impossible goodness of that moment, because he had lived long enough to know that ordinary, impossible goodness was the thing that kept you going when everything else was on fire. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. An email notification. Personal account. The sender was an address he didn't recognize, but the subject line read, "We need to meet. This morning. M. Holt." Ryan set the phone down with the screen facing up. Victoria had seen it. Their eyes met across the table over Lily's head, over the cereal bowl, over the small, warm domestic scene that had no business being part of this story and was part of it anyway. Victoria gave the smallest possible nod. Ryan looked at Lily. "Hey, Bug, can you do me a favor and get dressed early today? I need to drop you at Mrs. Patterson's before school." Lily looked up from her cereal with the expression of someone calculating the significance of this deviation from routine. "Is this a grown-up emergency?" "It's a work thing." "That's what you say when it's a grown-up emergency." "Go get dressed, please." She went. Ryan could hear her down the hall moving with the particular deliberate casualness of a child who was paying attention to everything and performing the opposite. Ryan looked at Victoria. Holt responded. I saw. She wants to meet this morning. That's good. That means she read the email. It means she read it, and she's not running away from it. Ryan picked up the phone and typed a short reply, his address, a 1-hour window, a note that they would have the full document package ready. He sent it before he second-guessed himself. She's coming here, Victoria asked. Neutral ground. Her office has surveillance. The company building is out. Here is the only location I can guarantee isn't being watched. You can't guarantee this location either. After the phone call was a warning shot. If they had this address flagged, they'd have done something with it by now. They called to rattle me, not because they knew where I was. He put the phone down. We have a window. We use it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Margaret is going to have questions. Hard ones. About the chain of custody, about the backup archive, about why neither of us went through official channels before coming to her. I know. She's going to wonder if this is a counterplay. If I'm using you to manufacture a crisis that makes me look like the victim. I know that too. And your answer to that is going to matter more than mine. Because I have everything to gain from her believing this. You have everything to lose. Ryan looked at her steadily. Then I'll tell her the truth. The whole truth. Including the part where my CEO climbed through my bedroom window at midnight and I almost hit her with a baseball bat. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. That is going to be a strange thing to explain. The truth usually is. Lily came back down the hall wearing her school clothes and her softball cap and carrying her backpack, which she had apparently packed herself, and which was, Ryan noticed, slightly lopsided in a way that suggested she had put her lunch on top of her books again. She stopped and looked at Victoria. Your shoes don't match your clothes, Lily said. Neutral observation, no judgment. Victoria looked down at Ryan's old navy running shoes. I know, I had to borrow them. From my dad. Yes. Lily processed this. They're too big. Also true. I have a pair of sparkly sneakers that might fit you, but they're pink. I appreciate the offer, Victoria said. I'm going to manage with these. Lily shrugged with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had offered a reasonable solution and been politely declined. Ryan got Lily into her jacket, fixed the backpack lopsidedness situation, and walked her 3 floors down to Mrs. Patterson's apartment, where the retired schoolteacher, who had become an unofficial anchor of their lives for the past 4 years, accepted Lily and the explanation of work situation with the matter-of-fact grace of someone who had seen many such mornings. He was back upstairs in 7 minutes. Victoria was standing at the window, not in front of it, slightly beside it, looking down at the street at an angle, the way someone looks when they're checking something without being seen checking it. She turned when he came in. There's a car, she said. Ryan crossed to the window, looked down at the angle she had been using. A dark sedan parked at the end of the block. It had been there when he came in last night. He remembered noticing it, the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit. Not because anything was obviously wrong, but because the parking patterns on his street followed a rhythm he knew by heart after 3 years. The sedan had not moved. Someone was in it. He could see the faint disturbance of breath fog on the inside of the driver's window. How long has it been there? I noticed it about 20 minutes ago. It was there before I started watching. Ryan thought about the phone call at 3:30 a.m. He thought about the warning shot theory. He revised it slightly. They're watching, he said. But they're not moving. Which means they still don't know what we have. If they knew, they'd be doing more than watching. Or they're waiting for someone. Margaret Holt is coming here in... He checked his watch. 40 minutes. Victoria looked at him. If they see her arrive. She'll come through the back. There's a service entrance off the alley on the east side. I'll text her the address change. He picked up his phone. Do you have a number for her directly? Her assistant's number. I can call. Do it now, Victoria called. She spoke quietly and quickly, and with a kind of executive precision that Ryan had seen in boardrooms, and which here in his kitchen with a dark sedan, parked at the end of his block, felt entirely different. Felt like a survival skill rather than a professional one. She hung up. Margaret's assistant will relay the message. She's already in the car. Okay. Ryan moved to the kitchen. He made fresh coffee, real coffee, not the convenience store kind, but the good bag he kept for actual mornings, because Margaret Holt was 71 years old and had been doing corporate oversight since before Ryan Mitchell was born. And you didn't ask a woman like that to sit down with a crisis document package without offering her something decent to drink. While the coffee brewed, he sat at the table and opened the document package one more time. He went through it the way he always went through important things before presenting them, not looking for errors, because he had already found every error there was to find. Looking for gaps. Looking for the place a skeptical reader might pause and say, "But how do you know this?" And making sure that at every such place the answer was already on the page. The package held. Victoria came and sat across from him. She had done something with her hair, pulled it back, controlled it, and she had cleaned the dried blood from her face at some point during the night. And she was wearing the same torn blouse, but she had tucked it in and straightened it as much as it could be straightened. And she looked, Ryan thought, like someone who had been through something and was actively refusing to let that something define the next hour. "How are you feeling?" he asked. It was such a simple question that it seemed to catch her off guard. "I feel like I'm about to walk into the most important meeting of my professional life from a kitchen in a building whose elevator doesn't work," she said, wearing borrowed shoes. "You've walked into important meetings in worse shape than this." "I've never walked into any meeting having not slept. I have a personal policy." "How's that policy working out?" She almost smiled, almost, revising it in real time. The knock at the back service entrance came 37 minutes after Victoria's call. Ryan had given the building's rear entry code to Holt's assistant over text. He went down the back stairs narrower than the main stairwell, used mostly by residents carrying groceries, and opened the service door. Margaret Holt was 71 and looked like it in the best possible way. The way that means 7 decades of paying close attention to difficult things, of not being fooled, of showing up anyway. She was a small woman, white-haired, wearing a dark wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase that was old enough to have developed character. She looked at Ryan the way a person looks at something they have already decided to take seriously. "You're Mitchell." "Yes, ma'am." "You didn't sleep?" "No, ma'am." "Good. People who sleep well before difficult meetings usually haven't understood the meeting." She stepped inside. "Where's Victoria?" Margaret Holt walked into Ryan's kitchen and looked at Victoria Caldwell with an expression that was equal parts assessment and something older and more complicated, the way you look at someone you remember as younger as someone else's child, now grown into the full weight of their circumstances. "You look terrible," Margaret said. "I've had a difficult 12 hours. Your email said someone tried to destroy you." "That's a big word, destroy." "It's an accurate one." "Show me." They sat down. Ryan poured coffee. Margaret didn't touch hers. She put on reading glasses that she pulled from her coat pocket, opened the document package that Ryan slid across the table, and began to read. She did not speak. She read the way that serious readers read, the way that means the words are actually landing, actually being processed, not just scanned. She turned pages with the deliberate rhythm of someone who is not performing attention, but practicing it. Ryan watched her. Victoria watched Ryan watching her. Nobody said anything for 11 minutes. Then Margaret turned back to the Ardmore transfer section. She looked at the figures. She looked at the credential authorization record. She looked at the Q3 timestamp comparison. She took off her glasses. She set them on the table. She picked up her coffee cup, which had gone cool, and drank from it anyway. "Carter Lane has been with the company for 15 years, she said. 11 years under my father, Victoria said. 4 under me. And Jeffrey Marsh has been on that board since before you were born. Since before my father built the company into what it became. Yes." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "This archive you pulled the access logs from," she said to Ryan. "Tell me about it." Ryan told her. He told her about the system migration project, the incomplete transfer, the 6% of files that had never made it to the main network, the backup that had sat untouched for 2 years. He told her about the boring folder name. He told her exactly why the data it contained was credible, because it had never been connected to the main system, because Carter Lane's administrative credential had no visibility into it, because no one with a reason to manipulate it had ever known it was there. Margaret listened without interrupting. And this is the first time you've accessed it since the migration project was deprioritized. I've accessed it periodically to make sure it was still intact. Never pulled anything from it until last night. Why were you maintaining it? Because I'm the kind of person who doesn't delete things I might need later. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Your file has a note, she said, from a previous manager. Ryan stared at her. You read my employee file. I read every file for every senior analyst in every financial department annually. I am the independent oversight officer, Mr. Mitchell. That is precisely what oversight means. She paused. The note said you were difficult due to excessive opinions about the correct way to do things. I've been told. I thought it sounded like an asset. I made a note to that effect. Ryan looked at Victoria. Victoria's expression said, I told you someone was watching. Margaret picked up the document package again. The board meeting is Thursday at 10 a.m., she said. That's... She glanced at the window, calculating. 31 hours from now. We know, Ryan said. What I can do is this. Margaret's voice was careful and precise. The voice of someone who had spent decades measuring the weight of what she said before she said it. As independent oversight officer, I have the charter authority to issue a procedural hold on any board action where there is credible evidence of a conflict of interest or irregular financial activity. That hold pauses all voting proceedings pending formal review. How long does a hold last? Victoria asked. Minimum 90 days, maximum 18 months depending on the scope of the review. And during that time, no votes, no removal proceedings, no asset transactions above standard operating thresholds. Margaret set the package down. But I need to be clear with both of you about what this means. When I issue that hold, I am making a formal declaration that this evidence is credible enough to warrant investigation. Marsh will know it's coming. Lane will know. Whoever made that phone call last night will know. And they will have 31 hours to do whatever they're going to do in response. The kitchen was very quiet. What can they do? Ryan asked. Challenge the hold. File a competing motion through their own legal counsel. Attempt to discredit the evidence or the witness. She looked at Ryan directly. You are the witness, Mr. Mitchell. Your backup archive is the centerpiece of this case. They will come after the archive's credibility, and when that fails, they will come after yours. Let them. You understand what that means. Character challenges. Professional history. Your personal life examined. Everything. I understand. You have a daughter. Ryan met Margaret Holt's eyes without flinching. I know, and she's going to watch how I handle this. That's not a reason to step back. That's a reason to get it right. Margaret held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to Victoria. I need to know one thing from you, she said. And I need the honest answer, not the executive one. Victoria sat very still. Do you believe your father would have wanted you to fight this? Something happened in Victoria's face. Something deep and private that Ryan felt like an intruder for witnessing, and looked at anyway, because looking away felt like the wrong kind of respect. My father built that company because he believed that the way you build a thing matters as much as what you build, Victoria said slowly. He used to say that a company's character was just the sum of every decision its people made when no one was watching. Good decisions, honest ones, even when they were hard. She paused. He would have been furious, not just at Marsh and Lane, at himself for building a structure that allowed it. And then he would have done exactly what we're doing right now. Margaret nodded once, decisive. Then I'll issue the hold. She opened her briefcase. She pulled out a form, an actual paper form, thick-weighted stationery, the kind that has existed in some versions since before digital records, and she filled it out in a handwriting that was small and exact and completely legible. She signed it. She dated it. She handed one copy to Victoria and one copy to Ryan. "The official filing goes through my office by noon today," she said. "The board will be notified by 3 p.m. The hold takes effect immediately upon notification." "They'll push back immediately," Victoria said. "Of course they will. And every motion they file will create a paper trail. Every challenge they make will go into the record. Every attempt to discredit Mr. Mitchell's archive will require them to argue that the logs are falsified, which means they have to explain why falsified logs would conveniently show Carter Lane's credential used at 11:17 p.m. after hours, in a system he had no legitimate reason to access that night." Margaret closed her briefcase. "They are trapped. They simply don't know it yet." She stood up. She picked up her coffee cup, looked at it, and drank the rest of the cold coffee without complaint. "Thank you," Victoria said. "I know this isn't—" "Don't thank me," Margaret said. "Your father was my friend for 40 years. Thanking me for doing my job is an insult to both of us." She buttoned her coat. "I'll see myself out the back." She was halfway to the kitchen door when she stopped. She turned to look at Ryan. "The note I made in your file," she said, "after the one from your previous manager. You mentioned you'd made one. It said this one will matter eventually. Make sure someone's paying attention when he does." She left. The sound of her footsteps went down the back stairs even, and unhurried the footsteps of someone who had made a decision and was already moving on to the next thing. Ryan and Victoria sat in the kitchen. Ryan looked at the copy of the procedural hold in his hands. The official language was dense and formal and completely clear. A document that meant stop. Not yet. Not until this is examined. He set it on the table. "It's done," he said. "The hold is issued, but it isn't done." Victoria looked at her own copy. "Marsh is going to find out what we did and who helped us, probably by tonight. And then we deal with what comes next." "Ryan." Victoria looked at him with something in her face that was direct and uncomfortable and entirely real. "They're going to come for your job, even after this is over, even if the hold holds and the investigation runs and everything we found is confirmed. The people in that building who are aligned with Marsh are going to make your professional life very difficult. You know that." "I know. I can't protect you from all of it. I want to be honest about that. Even as CEO, there are limits to what I can." Victoria. Ryan looked at her calmly. "I've been raising a daughter on a mid-level analyst salary in an apartment where the elevator doesn't work. I'm not afraid of difficult." She was quiet. "You are the strangest person I have ever met," she said finally. "I'll take that. I mean it as a compliment." "I know. I'm taking it as one." Ryan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text message from the same unknown number as the 3:30 a.m. call. "Last chance. Walk away." He showed it to Victoria without comment. She read it. Then she picked up her own phone and did something Ryan didn't expect. She called Jeffrey Marsh directly. He answered on the second ring, which told Ryan that Marsh was awake and alert and waiting, which told him that Marsh knew something was happening even if he didn't know exactly what. Victoria. Marsh's voice was smooth and warm and completely false. The voice of a man who had spent decades performing collegial concern. "I was going to call you this morning. We need to stop pretending, Jeffrey." Victoria's voice was level and completely controlled. "The procedural hold on Thursday's meeting has been issued. You'll be notified by Margaret Holt's office this afternoon." A silence. "I don't know what you think I know about the Ardmore transfers. I know about your son-in-law's account. I know about Carter's credential and the timestamp on the Q3 files. And I know that you moved the board meeting date specifically because you thought you were running out of time." She paused. "You were right about that last part. You just miscalculated who was running out of time." Another silence. Longer. "This is a mistake, Victoria. Whatever you think you have is in the hands of the independent oversight officer as of this morning, along with a formal record of the phone calls made to a third party last night. I'd recommend speaking to your legal counsel, Jeffrey, today, before 3 p.m. She ended the call. She set the phone down. Ryan looked at her. "You wanted him to know. I wanted him to know before someone else told him. Because now every move he makes from this moment forward is reactive. He's not controlling the sequence anymore. She looked at the phone. He'll call an emergency meeting with Lane within the hour. Lane will panic. Panicked people make mistakes. And every mistake goes into a record. You're hurting them. I'm letting them hurt themselves. She looked up. My father taught me that too. He said the most effective thing you can do to a person who is playing a dishonest game is let them keep playing it in front of a referee. Ryan sat back in his chair. He thought about the sequence of the last 8 hours. The window opening, the baseball bat, the cold coffee and the USB drive, and the document package built in the middle of the night. Margaret Holt drinking cold coffee without complaint and signing a form that was going to stop a board meeting and expose a 15-year scheme built on patience and performed loyalty. He thought about a sedan at the end of his block and a phone call at 3:30 a.m. and a text that said, "Last chance." He thought about Lily at Mrs. Patterson's apartment, probably at the table right now, eating whatever Mrs. Patterson made her for breakfast. Probably telling a story that started in the middle and ended somewhere unexpected, because that was how Lily told all her stories. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he recognized. His department director, David Reyes. A man Ryan had worked alongside for 3 years. A man he respected, a cautious and decent person who stayed carefully in the center of things. Ryan looked at the text. Heads up. You've been flagged for an urgent HR review. Marcia's office requested it this morning. Today at 2 p.m. Just FYI. Ryan showed it to Victoria. She read it. Her jaw tightened. That was fast, Ryan said. He can't touch the hold, so he's going after you. Her voice was flat. This is what I warned you about. I know. Ryan. Victoria. He set the phone down. Look at me. She looked at him. I walked into this knowing it was a possibility. I'm not surprised. I'm not going to walk it back because it got real. He held her gaze. What I need you to do right now is not feel guilty about this. Because if you spend your energy on guilt, you're not spending it on the next move. And we still have 30 hours and a lot of next moves to make. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You're not angry. I'm furious. But anger is information, not a plan. That sounds like something my father used to say. Smart man. She was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in her face. A very small shift, but a real one. The kind of shift that happens in a person when they have been carrying something alone for a very long time, and someone else has just quietly and without ceremony picked up part of the weight. What's the next move? She asked. Ryan picked up his phone. He texted David Reyes back. I'll be there at 2. Thanks for the heads up. Then he opened his laptop. I'm going to write a pre-statement, he said. A formal personal account of every action I've taken since last night. Time-stamped, detailed in the order it happened. If they're going to review me, they're going to review a person with a complete and documented record of exactly what he did and exactly why. I'll write one too, Victoria said immediately. Corroborating, from my perspective. Both of us independently. Don't look at mine until you've finished yours. We want 2 separate accounts that happen to match because they're both true. Not 2 accounts that read like they were coordinated. Agreed. They worked at opposite ends of the kitchen table. The coffee went cold again. The morning light moved across the floor. Outside, the city went about its business with the cheerful indifference of a city that doesn't know or care what is happening in any specific kitchen, in any specific building, on any specific block. Ryan wrote his account. He wrote it a night that had started with a window opening, and was now 12 hours later, sitting at a kitchen table with a formal oversight hold, and 2 pre-statements, and a 2 p.m. HR review, and a phone that kept buzzing. He finished at 10:43 a.m. He read it through once. It was accurate. He printed it on the same pharmacy machine he'd used in the middle of the night, different copies, different paper, same cash, and brought it back and signed it at the bottom with the date and time. Victoria slid her statement across the table. He didn't read it yet. He wouldn't until after his 2 p.m. meeting. He put both statements in the folder with the document package. He looked at Victoria across the table. She looked tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix quickly, the kind of tired that takes weeks to recover from, the kind that comes from sustained vigilance, from never fully putting down your guard. But her eyes were clear. Her hands were still. "Whatever happens at 2 o'clock, she said, I need you to know something." Ryan waited. Whatever they say in that meeting, whatever they use, whatever version of this story they try to tell, she looked at him steadily. "I know what you did and why you did it, and I will not let that be rewritten." Ryan held her gaze. "I thought about 3 years of keeping his head down. 3 years of being the person in the room who saw things and stayed quiet about them until he understood what he was seeing. 3 years of doing the work carefully and going home to his daughter and telling himself that being good at his job was enough." He thought about the Hargrove presentation, the 6 vice presidents, the way the room had gone very still when he stood up and said, "I think the model is wrong." I thought about the night his daughter was born. He thought about every moment where being honest cost something, and every time he had paid it anyway, and how all of those moments had led him here to this kitchen table, to this mess, to this particular version of choosing the right thing in front of a person who was watching to see what he would do. "I know," Ryan said. He picked up his jacket. "I'm going to go get my daughter from Mrs. Patterson's," he said. "I'm going to take her to school. I'm going to make sure she has her lunch because she put it on top of her books again, and I reorganized her bag, but you never know with her. And then I'm going to come back here, and we're going to spend the next 3 hours making sure that when I walk into that HR meeting at 2 o'clock, I walk in with everything I need." He buttoned his jacket. "And then I'm going to walk in." Victoria was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not the executive expression, not the frightened expression, not the quiet, exhausted one, from the middle of the night. Something else. Something that was maybe what a person looks like when they have been alone with something very heavy for a very long time, and have just unexpectedly been reminded that there are people in the world who exist without agenda. "Your daughter is very lucky," she said. Quiet. Genuine. Ryan picked up his keys. "No," he said simply. "I'm the lucky one." He left. The door closed behind him. And Victoria Caldwell sat alone in a kitchen that wasn't hers, with borrowed shoes on her feet, and cold coffee in her cup, and a stack of documents that were going to determine the next chapter of her life, and she sat with her back straight and her hands still the way she always did. But something was different. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't holding herself together out of pride or stubbornness, or the fear of what happened if she stopped. She was holding herself together because she had something to hold herself together for. That was different. That was everything. The HR meeting was in Conference Room B on the 4th floor, which Ryan had always thought was a deliberately uncomfortable room, the kind of space designed to make people feel small, without any single element being obviously responsible for the effect. The chairs were slightly too low. The table was slightly too large. The overhead light had a frequency that made everything look a little more fatigued than it actually was. Ryan arrived at 1:58 p.m. He was carrying a folder. Inside the folder was his pre-statement, the time-stamped personal account he had written that morning at his kitchen table. 31 pages. Signed, dated, specific. He was also carrying in the inside pocket of his jacket a USB drive, a copy of everything. He sat down and waited. 2 people came in at exactly 2:00 p.m. Sandra Cho from Human Resources, who Ryan had spoken with perhaps 4 times in 3 years, and who now looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has been handed a situation they did not create and do not enjoy. And beside her, a man Ryan did not recognize, late 40s, gray suit, the specific neutral expression of someone who is paid to conduct formal proceedings and has learned to make his face communicate nothing during them. "Mr. Mitchell," Sandra said. "Thank you for coming." "Of course. This is David Ferris. He's an external HR consultant, retained by the board for matters of this nature." External consultant, retained by the board. Ryan noted both of those things and set them in the part of his mind where he kept information that wasn't useful yet, but would be. "What nature are we talking about?" Ryan asked. Sandra looked at a paper in front of her. She looked like she would rather be anywhere else. A concern has been raised regarding potential conflicts of interest and conduct violations involving your relationship with the CEO. Specifically, she stopped, glanced at Ferris. Specifically, it has been alleged that you have been in unauthorized contact with Ms. Caldwell outside of professional channels, and that this contact may have influenced internal financial reporting processes in ways that constitute a breach of your employment agreement. Ryan sat with that for a moment. Who raised the concern? The concern was raised through the board's compliance oversight channel, Jeffrey Marsh's office. The concern was raised through the board's compliance oversight channel. Sandra repeated in the careful tone of someone who knows the answer and has been told not to give it. Ryan opened his folder. He slid his pre-statement across the table. I prepared a formal account of my recent actions in anticipation of this meeting, he said. I'd like it entered into the record of this proceeding. Ferris picked it up. He paged through it with the speed of someone doing a quick structural assessment rather than actually reading. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes, Ryan noticed, moved faster than his face let on. This is quite detailed, Ferris said. It's complete. There's a difference. Mr. Mitchell. Ferris set the document down with a deliberateness that was meant to signal control of the room. I want to be straightforward with you about what we're looking at here. The allegations that have been brought forward suggest a pattern of behavior that could constitute serious professional misconduct. We're not here to make a determination today. We're here to give you the opportunity to speak to the concerns before any formal action is taken. I appreciate that. The board has significant concerns about... Can I ask you something? Ferris paused. Of course. Who specifically on the board requested this review? I'd like the name on record. Another pause. Longer. Board requests are collective in nature. This one wasn't. This one came from a specific office and was filed this morning approximately 40 minutes after a procedural hold was issued on Thursday's board meeting by the independent oversight officer. I'd like the name of the board member who filed the request entered into this record. Sandra looked at her paper. Then she looked at Ferris. Ferris looked at Ryan with an expression that was recalibrating in real time. You're aware of the procedural hold. I'm aware of quite a lot, Mr. Ferris. That's why I prepared 31 pages instead of showing up with a verbal explanation. A silence settled over the room. Not the uncomfortable silence that the room was designed to produce. A different kind, the silence of a proceeding that has just discovered it is not going in the direction it was designed to go. Sandra spoke carefully. Mr. Mitchell, the scope of this review includes your personal contact with Ms. Caldwell outside of professional settings. Can you speak to that? Yes. Starting on page 3 of my statement, I provide a complete account of Ms. Caldwell's arrival at my home late Tuesday night, the reason for that arrival, and everything that occurred subsequently. I've included timestamps where I had them and approximate times where I didn't. I've included the content of communications received from an unknown number, which I believe originated from someone acting at the direction of board members who are currently under independent oversight investigation. All of it is documented. Ferris had stopped pretending to be neutral. He was reading the statement now, actually reading it. Page 3, he said almost to himself. Page 3. Ryan confirmed. Sandra put her pen down. She looked at Ryan with an expression that had shifted entirely from professional management of an uncomfortable situation to something more like genuine attention. You're saying the contact with Ms. Caldwell was directly related to the discovery of financial irregularities. I'm saying that Ms. Caldwell came to me because she had uncovered evidence of a coordinated scheme to falsify financial records and remove her from her position, and because she had reason to believe that the scheme involved individuals within the company with access to communications she could not trust. She came to me because I was one of the only people she believed had both the knowledge to understand the evidence and the independent standing to corroborate it. And did you corroborate it? I had a secondary archive that contained system access logs that no one else knew existed. Those logs provided the timestamp evidence that formed the backbone of the package delivered to Margaret Holt. Yes, I corroborated it. Ferris set the statement down very carefully. Mr. Mitchell, he said, and his voice had changed, not warmer exactly, but different, more real. I need to tell you something, and I want to be clear that I'm saying this as a professional observation and not as any kind of guidance. The people who requested this review, Ferris. Sandra said his name in a way that meant be careful, are operating under an assumption that this proceeding would function as leverage. Ferris continued as if Sandra hadn't spoken. That assumption may not account for the current state of the independent oversight process. I know, Ryan said. This review was filed before the hold notification went out. By about 40 minutes, yes. Which means whoever filed it didn't know the hold was coming when they filed it. Which means they were panicking, Ryan said. And panicked people make reactive decisions, and reactive decisions don't account for the possibility that the person they're coming after came prepared. Ferris looked at him. Sandra looked at him. Ryan sat with his folder open on the table, and his hands folded on top of it, and the specific calm of someone who has spent a sleepless night making sure that this exact moment would go exactly this way. I'm not here to fight this review, Ryan said. I'm here to document the truth. Everything I did because I had evidence of serious financial misconduct, and I had the professional obligation and the personal choice to act on it. If the board wants to make my employment a casualty of their attempt to discredit that evidence, they are within their technical rights to try. But the record will show what it shows. Ferris closed the statement. He looked at Sandra. Something passed between them that Ryan couldn't quite read, but could sense the particular wordless communication of two professionals who have just jointly realized that the proceeding they were asked to conduct is not what they were told it would be. We're going to need to pause this review pending the outcome of the oversight process, Ferris said. I don't think either of us is in a position to make any determination in a matter that is directly connected to an active independent investigation. I think that's the right call, Sandra said. Mr. Mitchell. Ferris looked at him directly. You should know, and again, this is observation, not guidance, that what you've documented here is going to be very difficult for anyone to dismiss. The chain of custody is clean. The records are clear. And the timeline is... He paused. The timeline is very convincing. It's convincing because it's true. Yes. Ferris picked up the statement again. That does tend to help. The review was suspended at 2:31 p.m. Ryan walked out of conference room B and stood in the fourth-floor hallway and let himself breathe for about 15 seconds. Just breathe, in and out. The way you do when something you were afraid of has passed and you need a moment to confirm to your body that it's over. Then he took the elevator down. The office building's elevator worked fine, unlike his apartments, and walked out the front door and called Victoria. She picked up on the first ring. How did it go? They suspended the review, pending the oversight outcome. A silence. Then, good. They were trying to use it as leverage, to pressure me into walking away or recanting. But the pre-statement changed the geometry of the meeting. They walked in thinking they were running a proceeding and found out they were sitting in front of a documented record they'd have to formally dispute. Ferris is sharp. He would have seen it immediately. He did. He actually... Ryan paused. He told me the timeline was convincing, off the record. He told you your evidence was strong. More or less, in the careful way of someone who is still technically in the room with people who hired him. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Marsh is going to know the review failed within the hour. I know. He'll move to the next option, probably a direct legal challenge to Holt's authority to issue the hold. They'll argue procedural grounds that she exceeded her charter scope, that the evidence was improperly obtained. Can they win that argument? They can make it. Whether they win? She paused. My father's lawyers wrote that charter. They wrote it specifically to make the oversight position difficult to challenge. Marsh has always known that. It's one of the reasons he's moved slowly. He didn't want to go to a legal challenge without being certain he'd win. He's not certain now. He's not even close to certain. He's rattled and reactive, and he's going to start making the kind of decisions you make when you're more afraid of losing than interested in winning. A pause. I've been where he is. I know what it looks like from the inside. What does it look like? It looks like everything you do stops being strategic and starts being desperate. And desperate people show their hand. Ryan started walking. No particular direction, just moving, because he had been sitting in rooms for the last several hours, and his body needed to be in motion. Where are you? he asked. Still at your apartment. I hope that's... It's fine. I told you that. I didn't want to assume. Victoria, you can stay in my apartment. It's fine. A pause. Your neighbor across the hall knocked this morning. An older gentleman. He wanted to know if everything was all right because he heard someone on your stairs very early. That's Mr. Beaumont. He's 83 and he misses nothing. I told him I was a work colleague and that everything was fine. What did he say? He said, young lady, you don't look like you slept, and your shoes don't match your clothes, but that's none of my business. And then he went back inside and closed his door. Ryan found himself almost smiling. That's about right. He seems like a good man. He's been looking out for this building since before I moved in. He used to look out for Lily when she was small, and I had to work late. Ryan paused. A lot of people helped me when I needed it, quietly, without expecting anything back. Like you're doing now. I'm not doing anything I wouldn't want done. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly different, more careful, like she was choosing words that she didn't usually choose. I've been sitting here this morning thinking about something you said last night. About Lily watching what you do. About the story you're telling. Yeah. I've never thought about my life that way. In terms of story. I've thought about it in terms of outcomes. Results. Whether the decision I made produced the result I intended. She paused. But story is different. Story is about what the decisions say about you, not just what they produce. That's right. I don't think I've been telling the right story. For a long time. Ryan stopped walking. I was on the sidewalk, 2 blocks from the office in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, and he was having a conversation that felt like it belonged to a different kind of moment than the street noise around him. What story do you want to tell? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring out what that means. She paused. But I know it's different from the one I've been telling. Ryan started walking again. That's enough, he said. Knowing it's different is enough to start. He was 3 blocks from his apartment when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he now recognized as Margaret Holt's assistant. Board has filed a legal challenge to the hold. Marsh's attorneys filed at 3:15 p.m. Ms. Holt is prepared. Hearing scheduled for Wednesday morning 9 a.m. Federal Courthouse downtown. Ms. Holt requests both you and Ms. Caldwell present. Ryan read the text twice. Federal Courthouse. Wednesday morning. 15 hours away. He walked faster. When he got back to the apartment, Victoria was at his kitchen table with her laptop. She had apparently retrieved it from her car at some point during the day, which Ryan chose not to ask about, and she was reading something with the focused, tight expression of a person processing bad news they had already anticipated. You got the text, Ryan said. I got a call. From Marsh's attorney directly. As a courtesy. Her voice was dry. What kind of courtesy? The kind where someone explains the legal challenge they've filed in language designed to sound inevitable and suggest that the graceful move would be to withdraw the hold voluntarily before the hearing. He's still trying to offer you an exit. He's trying to offer me a version of losing that I have to choose myself, so that the losing looks like a decision instead of a defeat. And I told his attorney that I would see him in court. Ryan sat down. He looked at Victoria across the table at the woman who had climbed through his window 36 hours ago with blood on her face and borrowed shoes and a USB drive and a story that had turned his ordinary life inside out, and he thought about everything that had happened between that window and this kitchen table. The hearing, he said. What does Marsh need to prove to win? That Holt exceeded her charter authority in issuing the hold. Specifically, that the evidence presented to her was insufficient to meet the threshold for a formal hold under the original governance agreement. Victoria turned her laptop around. The threshold language says, and I've been staring at this for an hour. The threshold says, the evidence must demonstrate credible indication of material financial irregularity involving board-level conduct. The question is whether what we have meets that standard. Ryan looked at the language on the screen. It does, he said immediately. I know it does. But Marsh's attorneys are going to argue that the evidence was obtained through irregular channels, specifically that your backup archive is not a formally recognized record under the company's data governance policy, and therefore cannot meet the threshold for credible evidence under the charter. The archive is a legitimate record. It was created as part of an official system migration, which was never completed, which means it exists in a procedural gray zone that they're going to argue makes it inadmissible as a credible source. Ryan thought about that. I thought about the specific wording of the original migration project authorization. He thought about the project's official status. It had been deprioritized, not canceled. There was a difference between a project that was canceled, which might have included instructions to delete interim work, and a project that was merely suspended, which included no such instructions. The migration project was suspended, he said, not terminated. I can pull the project status record from the official project management system. It's going to show an active but paused status, which means the work product of that project, including the backup archive, is an active component of an official company process. Victoria stared at him. That's exactly the argument. It's not an argument. It's just the actual status of the project. Ryan, that's exactly the argument that defeats the chain of custody challenge. She sat forward. If the archive is part of an active official project, it isn't irregular. It's just unfinished. And unfinished doesn't mean invalid. We need the project status record pulled and certified before 9 a.m. tomorrow. Can you get it? I have access to the project management system through my analyst credentials. The records are read only at my level. I can pull them but not alter them, which actually makes the pull cleaner from an evidentiary standpoint. And I have David Reyes, my department director. He's a decent man. He warned me about the HR review this morning. If I explain what I need and why I think he'll authorize the pull. You trust him? Ryan thought about David Reyes. 3 years of working alongside him. The man had a quality that was becoming increasingly rare in Ryan's experience of the world this week. He genuinely didn't want anything from anyone. He just wanted to do his job correctly and go home. I trust him, Ryan said. Not in the sense that I can guarantee he won't protect himself if things get difficult, but in the sense that if I tell him the truth, he'll do the right thing with it. Ryan called David Reyes at 4:15 p.m. David picked up on the third ring. Mitchell, I heard the review was suspended. It was. I need a favor, David. A legitimate one. I need a formal pull of the project status record for the legacy migration project from 2023. Official certification today if possible. A pause. That's the Sinclair migration, the one that got deprioritized. That's the one. Can I ask why? Because there's a legal hearing tomorrow morning that's going to hinge in part on whether that archive is a legitimate company record, and the project status is going to establish that it is. A longer pause. Ryan. David's voice was careful. I've been watching what's been happening today. The board action, the hold the review request. I don't know everything that's going on, but I know enough to know that... He stopped. What you're asking me to do, is it the right thing? Yes. Are you sure? David, I have not slept. I have been in an HR review. I have been threatened by phone at 3:30 in the morning. And I am standing in my kitchen asking you for a project status pull that I could honestly justify as routine records maintenance, even without any of this context. Yes, I am sure. A pause. I'll have the certified record to you by 6 p.m., David said. Thank you, Ryan. A pause. For what it's worth. I read the Q3 numbers when they came through. I thought they were off. I told myself it wasn't my place to... He stopped. I should have said something. You're saying something now. I'll have it to you by 6. The line went quiet. Ryan put the phone down. Victoria was looking at him. He's going to help. He's going to do the right thing, Ryan said. That's different from helping. He's not doing it for me. He's doing it because it's correct. Is there a difference? Yeah, the difference is it'll hold up under pressure. People who do the right thing for themselves fold when it gets difficult. People who do the right thing because it's right tend to hold. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Ryan didn't expect. "I owe you an apology." He looked up. "For 3 years," she said. "For 3 years you worked in my company, and I treated you like a number in a head count. I knew your file. I knew you were sharp. I even knew after Hargrove that you were the kind of person who didn't come around very often. And I still looked past you every day, because it was easier to manage distance than to manage connection." She held his gaze. "That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Ryan sat with that for a moment. "You were protecting yourself," he said. "That's an explanation. It's not an excuse." "No," he agreed. "It's not. I've been using explanations as excuses for a long time. I think that's one of the things I need to stop doing." Ryan looked at her across the table. The evening light was shifting. The kitchen was going from afternoon gold to early evening gray, and in that shifting light, she looked less like the figure he had spent 3 years seeing from a distance, and more like someone he had actually spent 36 hours with, which was what she was. "Apology accepted," he said. "Just like that. Just like that. We've got a federal courthouse hearing in 15 hours. I don't have time for anything more complicated than accepted." Something moved through her face, not quite a smile. Something warmer than that, and more tired, and more real. "Right," she said. "Okay. Okay." They worked through the evening. The certified project status record arrived from David Reyes at 5:58 p.m. 2 minutes early, which Ryan thought said something about the man. He printed 2 copies. He added them to the document package with a cover note explaining the chain of logic migration project. Active but suspended archive as official work product. Official work product as credible evidence under the charter threshold language. He emailed the full revised package to Margaret Holt's office at 7:30 p.m. Margaret's response came at 8:12 p.m. Received. Clean. We're ready for tomorrow. Ryan read it to Victoria. She put her head back and closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. Then she opened them. "I need to call my father's lawyers tonight," she said. "I've been avoiding it because I don't know. Because calling them feels like admitting that this got to a place I couldn't handle myself. It got to a federal courthouse. That's not a character failure. That's a legal proceeding." I know that logically." "Call them." "I will." She paused. "My father used to call them at all hours. He said good lawyers expected to be called at inconvenient times because the things that required lawyers were always inconvenient." She picked up her phone. "I used to think that was just something he said. Now I understand it." She went to the living room to make the call. Ryan made dinner. He made the actual dinner he had been planning to make before any of this happened, pasta simple. The kind Lily liked because Lily was coming back from Mrs. Patterson's at 7 and she was going to be hungry. And she didn't need to know that the world had been quietly collapsing and reconstructing itself around her father's kitchen table all day. Lily arrived at 7:03 p.m., negotiated successfully with Ryan for extra pasta, and spent dinner telling them both an extremely detailed story about a disagreement during recess that involved disputed rules in a game Ryan had never heard of, and which appeared to have a genuinely complex geopolitical dimension for a schoolyard conflict. Victoria listened to the whole thing. She asked one question. But what was the original rule before anyone changed it? And Lily looked at her with the specific delight of someone who has finally found an audience member who understood the actual important point. After dinner, Ryan put Lily to bed. He sat on the edge of her bed while she told him she wasn't tired, which was followed almost immediately by her eyes drooping, which was followed almost immediately by sleep. He sat there for a moment in the dark. He thought about the hearing tomorrow, about the federal courthouse, about the project status record and the timestamp discrepancy and the Ardmore transfers and Carter Lane's credential and Jeffrey Marsh's son-in-law's account and the whole elaborate, patient, ugly architecture of what had been built against a woman who was trying to protect something her father had spent 40 years making. I thought about what it cost to stand up. The HR review. The phone call at 3:30 a.m. The sedan at the end of the block. The way David Reyes had said I should have said something with the quiet weight of someone who had been carrying that for weeks. He thought about the fact that tomorrow morning He was going to walk into a federal courthouse as a witness in a legal proceeding that he had gotten into by answering the sound of a window opening with a baseball bat. He looked at his daughter's face in the dark. The gap-toothed smile was somewhere underneath the sleep expression. He knew it was there, the way you know things about people you love without having to look. He thought, I am going to tell you this story someday. And when I do, I want you to understand that this was the moment where I chose. Not by accident, and not because I had no choice. Because I could see exactly what choosing meant, and I chose anyway. He kissed her on the forehead. He went back to the kitchen. Victoria was at the table. Her call was finished. She had her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She had found the tea at some point, and made herself a cup with the quiet resourcefulness of someone making peace with an unfamiliar space. The lawyers are ready, she said. They'll be at the courthouse by 8:30. Good. They said the charter language is strong, that the threshold argument is defensible. She paused. They also said that even if we win tomorrow, Marsh still has options. It won't be over. It never is. Not right away. No. Ryan sat down across from her. The apartment was quiet. Lily's fan hummed. The street outside was doing its late evening murmur. Get some sleep, he said. Real sleep. Couch is yours. Ryan, we have a federal courthouse at 9 a.m. You need to walk in there looking like yourself, not like someone who's been awake for 2 days. She looked at him for a moment. You need sleep too. I'll sleep. He probably wouldn't. They both knew it. Thank you, Victoria said. I know I keep saying that, and you keep telling me not to, but I don't have a better word. You said you'd find one eventually. I'll find one eventually. She looked at her tea. Tonight I'm just going to say thank you, for being the person who pays attention, for being the person who doesn't look away, for being... She stopped. For being someone who does the right thing, not because it's easy, but because it's right. And for raising a daughter who's going to grow up understanding what that means. She looked up. Thank you for all of that. Ryan held her gaze. The kitchen light was low. The night was quiet. The hearing was 9 hours away. Get some sleep, Victoria. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she nodded. And she went to the couch. And Ryan sat at his kitchen table in the dark, hands flat on the table, looking at nothing in particular. He sat with the weight of the choice he had made, and found that it was exactly as heavy as he had known it would be, and exactly as worth carrying. He sat with that for a long time, and then eventually he slept. Ryan was awake before the alarm. He had slept, as it turned out, not long. Maybe 4 hours, broken twice by the particular kind of half-waking that happens when your mind has more to process than your sleep can handle. But 4 hours was 4 hours, and when he sat up at 6:45 a.m. and heard the city starting its morning outside his window, he felt something that wasn't exactly calm, but was the thing adjacent to calm. The thing that comes when you have made all the decisions you can make, and the only remaining task is to show up. Victoria was already awake. He could hear her in the bathroom, the sound of water running, the quiet movements of someone trying not to disturb a sleeping household. Lily was still asleep. Ryan made coffee. He made it strong. He stood at the kitchen counter while it brewed and looked at the stack of documents on the table. The package they had built across 2 nights and 1 exhausted morning. The thing that had started as a USB drive pulled from a server room and turned into 31 pages of evidence, and a certified project record, and a formal oversight hold, and a federal courthouse appearance at 9 a.m. He thought about the night this started. The window opening, the baseball bat, the way Victoria had looked standing in his bedroom with dried blood on her face and borrowed shoes, and the specific expression of someone who had run out of places to run. 48 hours. That was all it had been. Victoria came out of the bathroom. She had done what she could with what she had. Her hair pulled back, her blouse as composed as a torn blouse could be, Ryan's running shoes still on her feet. She looked at him across the kitchen. You slept? She said. Some. Good. He poured 2 cups. She took hers without ceremony and stood next to him at the counter, and they drank in the quiet of early morning, and neither of them felt the need to fill it with words. At 7:15, Ryan went to wake Lily. She was already half awake in that particular drowsy middle state, where she would answer questions with complete sentences, but not fully register having done so. He sat on the edge of her bed and told her that he had to go somewhere important this morning, that Mrs. Patterson would take her to school, and that he would be there for pickup this afternoon. Lily looked at him with one eye mostly open. "Is it the grown-up emergency?" "It's the same one." "Is the lady coming with you?" "Yes." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, in the fully serious voice of someone who has decided something, "You should wear your good jacket." "I was planning to." "The gray one. It makes you look like you know what you're doing." Ryan looked at his daughter. "I know what I'm doing, Bug." "I know." She turned over. "That's why you should wear the jacket, so other people know too." He kissed her on top of her head. He wore the gray jacket. They left the apartment at 7:45. Ryan carried the document package. Victoria carried her laptop bag. They went down the back stairs. The sedan from the previous day was gone from the end of the block, which Ryan noted and filed as information, and walked 2 blocks to where Victoria's car was parked, retrieved sometime the previous afternoon, while Ryan had been in the HR review. Victoria drove. Ryan sat in the passenger seat with the folder in his lap and watched the city go past the window. "Are you nervous?" Victoria asked. "Yes." "Good," she said, and her voice had a quality he recognized from the one time he'd heard her sound almost warm in a professional setting. The Hargrove meeting when he'd stood up and told her she was wrong, and she'd looked at him with something that wasn't anger, even though she said the angry thing. "Nervous means you understand the stakes." "You're nervous too." "I am extremely nervous, and I have spent 30 years learning to look like I'm not." She kept her eyes on the road. "It's possibly my greatest professional skill and also my greatest personal liability." "You don't have to do that today," Ryan said. "Look like you're not." She glanced at him briefly. In a federal courthouse, where the judge is going to be trying to figure out whether you're telling the truth. Looking like you're not nervous when you clearly should be isn't confidence. It's performance. And judges know the difference. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "My father told me the same thing once," she said. "He said never try to look certain in a room that knows you can't be certain. Look honest instead. Certainty can be faked. Honesty is harder to manufacture." "Smart man," Ryan said the way he had said it before. "Yes," Victoria said quietly. He was. The federal courthouse was a building that had been designed to communicate the specific gravity of what happened inside it, not through grandeur, but through weight, through the sense that its walls had absorbed decades of consequential moments and were holding them. Ryan had never been inside it before. He stood on the steps for a moment before going in his gray jacket with his folder, and let himself feel the size of what they were walking into. Margaret Holt was already inside, standing with 2 younger attorneys in the lobby. She looked at them both when they came through the doors and gave a single decisive nod. "You're on time. Good. Marsh's team is here. 6 attorneys." She said it with the tone of someone reporting a weather condition. "They intend to argue that the backup archive fails the evidentiary threshold on 3 separate grounds. We are going to counter on all 3, plus introduce the project status certification. I've reviewed everything Ryan sent last night. The argument holds." "And the judge?" Victoria asked. "Federal Judge Carol Reyes, 24 years on the bench, sharp, does not tolerate theater. If either side tries to perform rather than argue, she'll cut them off." Margaret looked at Ryan. "That works in our favor." "Because our argument doesn't need theater," Ryan said. "Because your argument is built on records and timestamps and a backup archive that exists in an official project of unimpeachable mundane origin." Margaret almost smiled. "There is nothing theatrical about a forgotten server migration. That's precisely what makes it credible." They went in. The hearing room was smaller than Ryan had expected. Not a full courtroom, but a formal hearing chamber wood-paneled with the American flag in the corner and a raised bench at the front. Judge Carol Reyes was already seated. She was a compact woman in her early 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the patient, observant expression of someone who has heard every version of every argument and is waiting to hear this one. Marsh's legal team occupied one full side of the room. 6 attorneys, as Margaret had said. Jeffrey Marsh himself was not present. Ryan had half expected him to be. But Carter Lane was there, sitting in the back row in a dark suit, with his hands folded in his lap and his face arranged in an expression of careful concern that Ryan now recognized as the expression of a man who had spent years performing the emotions that served him. Ryan looked at him for one moment. Carter Lane felt the look and met it briefly, and something moved through his face that wasn't concern, something faster and less controlled before he looked away. Ryan looked away too. He had what he needed from that exchange. The hearing began at 9:02 a.m. Marsh's lead attorney was a man named Grover Sills, tall, silver-haired, with the particular manner of someone accustomed to filling rooms with his voice. He opened by arguing that Margaret Holt's procedural hold exceeded the charter authority of her position, that the evidence presented to her had been obtained through unauthorized means, and that the backup archive specifically failed to meet the evidentiary threshold because it was not a formally recognized company record under the current data governance policy. He spoke for 18 minutes. He was polished. He was structured. He was clearly very good at what he did. When he finished, Judge Reyes looked at Margaret's team. Response: Margaret's attorney, younger, quieter, with a way of speaking that wasted nothing, stood up and walked the judge through the project status certification. 12 minutes. He explained the migration project's official status. He explained the difference between a canceled project and a suspended one. He explained why the work product of an active but suspended official project was by definition a legitimate company record under any reasonable reading of the data governance policy. Then he introduced the project status document. He handed a copy to the judge. He handed a copy to Sills. Sills looked at it. His expression didn't change because men like Sills trained their expressions not to change. But something shifted in the room. A small atmospheric shift. The kind that happens when an argument built on one assumption runs into a fact that lives underneath that assumption. Judge Reyes read the document. She read it carefully. Then she put it down and looked at Sills. Counsel, your argument rests on the premise that this archive is not a formally recognized record. This document suggests the project under which it was created has an active status. How does your client's position account for that? Sills was very good. He pivoted smoothly. He argued that the project's administrative status was technical rather than substantive, that an unfinished migration project wasn't meaningfully active in any operational sense, and that the archive's isolation from the main compliance network demonstrated that it had never been integrated into the company's formal record-keeping structure. He was still good, but the argument was thinner now. Judge Reyes let him finish. Then she said in the patient tone of someone who has already made a decision and is giving the other side the courtesy of the moment. The question before me is not whether this archive was convenient or inconvenient to the parties involved. The question is whether it constitutes a credible record within the meaning of the charter language. A project of official origin with active status producing records through legitimate company infrastructure meets that definition. She took off her reading glasses. The challenge to the procedural hold is denied. The hold stands pending the outcome of the independent oversight investigation. Sills did not move. Carter Lane in the back row put one hand flat on the arm of his chair. Margaret's attorney said very quietly, "Thank you, Your Honor." The hearing ended at 10:41 a.m. Ryan stood up from his chair and realized his legs were slightly unsteady. The specific unsteadiness that follows sustained tension, releasing all at once, like a muscle that has been held too long, finally being allowed to relax. He stood still for a moment. Just breathed. Victoria was beside him. She was standing very straight. Her hands were at her sides, and they were not shaking. She turned to look at him. She opened her mouth to say something, and then she closed it. Because there was nothing that was going to be adequate to the moment, and she knew it, and somehow that was its own kind of thing. A person who had words for everything standing in a federal hearing room at 10:41 in the morning with a standing procedural hold and a silent acknowledgement that this was real, that it had worked, that they were still standing. Ryan nodded at her. She nodded back. Margaret Holt came to stand between them, her briefcase in hand, with the expression of someone who has completed a task correctly and is already thinking about the next one. "The investigation will take 90 days minimum," she said. During that time, the board cannot act against Victoria's position. Marsh will almost certainly resign before the investigation concludes. He won't want to be present for the findings. Lane. She paused. Lane will be the subject of a criminal referral. The Ardmore transfers are going to be a separate proceeding. When does that start? Ryan asked. That's not my domain, but I've already shared the relevant package with the appropriate parties. She looked at them both. It starts soon. She left. The two younger attorneys with her. Ryan and Victoria stood in the emptying hearing room. Carter Lane had gone while Ryan was watching the judge. He had simply stood up at some point during the closing moments and moved to the door and slipped out the way he had apparently been slipping through rooms for 15 years quietly without appearing to hurry, leaving before anyone thought to watch him go. Ryan thought about that. About the particular skill of a person who had spent a career making themselves invisible in the moments that mattered. I thought about the opposite of that, about standing up. It's not over, Victoria said. You know that. I know. The investigation. The criminal proceedings for Lane and possibly Marsh. The company is going to be in a difficult position for months. The board needs restructuring. The Ardmore situation is going to require an external audit of everything connected to it. She looked at the empty room. There's a long way between here and stable. Yes, and what they tried to do to you with the HR review, the phone calls that doesn't just disappear. The people in that company who were aligned with Marsh are still there. Some of them are going to be uncomfortable, and some of them are going to be hostile, and your professional life is going to be complicated for a while. Victoria. Ryan picked up his folder. You don't have to warn me about consequences. I knew the consequences. I made the choice anyway. That's how it works. She looked at him. I know. She stopped. I'm not good at accepting things I can't fix. Then let's talk about what you can fix. They walked out of the courthouse into the late morning. The city was doing its midweek daytime business. People moving taxis. The ordinary indifferent hum of a world that had not noticed what happened in that hearing room and would not have cared particularly if it had. Ryan buttoned his gray jacket against the wind. The company needs someone to run it while the board restructures, he said. That's you. That's still you regardless of what Marsh wanted. I know. The financial reporting structure needs a complete review. The compliance department needs new leadership. Lane's replacement has to be someone who can't be leveraged. And the Ardmore subsidiary needs to be audited from the beginning, which means you need someone who can read the historical records and trace every transaction back to its origin. Victoria looked at him. Are you describing your own job function? I'm describing what needs to happen. What you do with that description is your business. Ryan. I'm serious. I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you what the situation requires. I know you're not asking. She stopped walking. That's exactly why I want to offer it. He stopped too. The compliance director position, she said. It's going to need to be rebuilt from the ground up. New mandate, new structure reporting directly to the CEO rather than through the board. Independent authority to flag anything to anyone without going through a chain that can be compromised. She held his gaze. I want someone in that role who I know will tell me when I'm wrong. Who will tell me before it costs the company $37 million. Who has already proven in the most specific possible terms that they cannot be bought, pressured, or scared into looking away. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. That's a significant offer. It's the right offer, which I believe you know. It's also a significant conflict of interest, given that you'd be offering it to someone who just spent 48 hours helping you save your company. It would be a conflict of interest if I were offering it as a reward. I'm offering it because you are the correct person for the role, and we both know it, and the 48 hours we just spent is evidence of that rather than the cause of it. She paused. There's a difference. You're good at those distinctions. I learned from someone who pays attention to them. Ryan looked at the city around them. At the ordinary Tuesday that had been happening while extraordinary things occurred in a formal hearing room 3 floors up. He thought about his desk, his routine. 3 years of mid-level analyst work in a company he was good at and never fully visible in. He thought about Lily's college fund with $4,200 in it. I thought about what it meant to be the person who said the right thing when it was inconvenient, and what it meant to let that be seen, and what it meant when the world occasionally imperfectly on no particular schedule noticed. "I'll think about it," he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You'll think about it." "I'll think about it seriously and give you an answer within a week." "Ryan, I have a daughter to think about. I have a life that works even if it's small. I don't make major decisions about my future in parking lots outside courthouses on 2 hours of sleep." She looked at him. Then she almost smiled. "That's fair," she said. "I know. But I want you to know, separate from the offer, separate from everything professional, that I am going to be a different kind of company, a different kind of leader." She said it quietly, without the executive voice, without the performance. "What you said about story, about the decisions you make when no one's watching being the ones that define you. I've been thinking about that since 2 o'clock this morning." She paused. "I've been running a company for 4 years and treating it like a fortress. Keeping everyone out. Making every decision alone, because I was afraid that connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant losing." She looked at him steadily. "I've been losing things I didn't know I had because I was so focused on protecting what I could count. And now I know what I nearly lost. And I know what it looked like: a man who paid attention when nobody told him to. A woman who built a charter that protected the company even after she stopped being famous for it. A department director who authorized a document pull at 5:58 p.m. because it was the right thing to do." She paused. "An 8-year-old who asked if I was okay before she asked anything else." Ryan was quiet. "People show you who they are," Victoria said. "I spent 4 years protecting myself from people, and in 48 hours I was shown repeatedly exactly who people could be when given the chance." She looked at him. "I don't want to run a company that makes it difficult for people to be that." "Then don't." "I'm not going to." She said it like a decision already made, because it was. They stood there for another moment. The city moved around them. "Come on," Ryan said. "I need to pick up my daughter from school in 4 hours, and I haven't eaten since last night." "I know a place," Victoria said. "Of course you do. It's good, I promise." "Your shoes don't match your clothes," Ryan said. "I'm not sure your restaurant judgment is currently reliable." "The shoes are your fault. The shoes are a consequence of your choices." "That's a very lawyerly thing to say. I spent the night building a legal case. It's leaking into my vocabulary." She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost, and it was the realest thing he had seen from her yet. They got in the car. She drove them to the restaurant, which was a quiet corner diner, 6 blocks from the courthouse, that had booths and good coffee, and the particular quality of a place that had been there long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. Ryan ordered eggs. Victoria ordered the same. They sat across from each other in a booth and ate without talking much, and the silence was the easy kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. When the coffee arrived, Victoria wrapped both hands around the cup, the same way she had wrapped them around the cup in Ryan's kitchen 48 hours earlier, and Ryan noticed it and thought some habits are just who a person is when they stop performing. "What does Lily want to be when she grows up?" Victoria asked. Ryan considered. "Currently, a professional softball player who is also somehow a horse trainer, and possibly a marine biologist. The exact configuration changes every 2 or 3 weeks. That sounds exhausting to keep up with." "It's my favorite thing in the world." Victoria looked at her coffee. "I want that," she said quietly. "Not necessarily the softball and horses, but that feeling of something being your favorite thing in the world. Something that isn't a company, or a quarterly report, or a board vote." She looked up. "I used to have things like that. Before I became responsible for everyone else's livelihoods and my father's legacy, and 4 years of proving I deserved to be where I was." She paused. "I forgot how to want things that weren't strategic." "What did you want before?" "I wanted to travel. I wanted to read things that weren't financial documents. I wanted—" She stopped and smiled, small and private. "I wanted to learn to cook. My father's housekeeper used to let me sit in the kitchen when I was small, and she would let me help with things. I loved it. I was completely mediocre at it, but I loved it. She looked at the table. I haven't cooked anything in 4 years. You could start again. I know. That's the thing I've been realizing all morning. She looked up. The things I gave them up because I thought they were the cost of everything I was trying to build. And maybe they were. But the building is still standing without me sacrificing everything to it. So what was the point? The point, Ryan said carefully, is that you built it. You kept it standing when people were trying to take it apart. And now you get to decide what comes next. She looked at him across the table. What comes next? She repeated, like she was trying the phrase on. What comes next? He confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she sat up slightly straighter the way a person does when something inside them resettles. I'm going to accept the 90 days, she said. The investigation period. I'm going to use it to restructure the board properly, to rebuild compliance from the ground up, to look at every operational assumption the company has been running on and ask whether it's true or just inherited. She paused. And I'm going to take at least 2 days off, actual days off, non-strategic ones. 2 whole days. Don't push it. I wasn't saying anything. You were thinking it loudly. Ryan picked up his coffee. I'm thinking that 2 days is a start, he said, and that you should cook something on one of them, even if it's mediocre. Victoria looked at him. I'll consider it. Good. He left the restaurant at 12:30. He drove back to his apartment. Victoria had a car to retrieve lawyers to debrief a company to begin stabilizing, and he climbed 3 flights of back stairs, the ones without the elevator, and unlocked his door. His apartment was the same as it always was. Small. Functional. The kind of space that accumulates the specific texture of a life actually lived in it. The school forms on the counter, the softball equipment by the door, the bookshelf. Lily had partially reorganized in a way that made sense to her and no one else. The kitchen table that had hosted over the last 48 hours, the kind of conversation that changes the shape of things. Ryan set his folder on the table. He stood in his kitchen for a moment. He thought about what David Reyes had said. I should have said something. The weight in those words. The specific regret of a decent person who had seen something and calculated the cost of speaking and stayed quiet. Ryan didn't judge him. He understood it. The calculating of costs was one of the most human things there was. He just happened to be someone who at the end of the calculation almost always found that the cost of silence was higher than the cost of speaking. That wasn't virtue. That was just his particular math. He picked up his phone. One unread text. Victoria's number. He had it now saved properly. Not the unknown number that had caused him to hesitate the first time she contacted him. I just realized I never told you what my note said. The one I wrote in your file after the Hargrove meeting. I said this one knows what honesty costs and pays it anyway. I want people like this around me. Figure out how to keep him. Ryan read it twice. He typed back. You kept me by almost firing me. Her response came immediately. That was the negotiation. He put the phone down. I went and picked up Lily from school at 3:15. She came running out the front doors in her softball cap backpack bouncing and hit him at approximately the velocity of something that had been in motion all day and had finally found its target. He caught her. He held on for a moment longer than usual. She didn't notice or noticed and didn't comment on it, which was its own kind of grace. How was the grown-up emergency? She asked into his shoulder. It worked out. I knew it would. Did you? You wore the gray jacket. She pulled back and looked at him with complete confidence. It always works out when you wear the gray jacket. Ryan looked at his daughter. The gap-toothed smile. The softball cap. The absolute certainty of an 8-year-old who has decided her father is competent and has not yet encountered sufficient evidence to revise the conclusion. Yeah, he said. I guess it does. He took her hand and they walked home. 3 weeks later, the investigation confirmed everything the document package had shown. Jeffrey Marsh resigned from the board before the findings were formally presented, citing personal reasons in a statement that 3 different news outlets described as the shortest resignation letter in the company's history. Carter Lane was referred for criminal prosecution on charges that included financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The Ardmore transfers were fully traced, the money was identified, and recovery proceedings began. Victoria restructured the board. She rebuilt the compliance department with a mandate that reported directly to the CEO. She filled the position with someone she trusted completely. Ryan accepted the role 6 days after the courthouse. He had thought about it for 5 days, and then woken up on the 6th and known in the specific way of knowing that doesn't require further thinking that it was the right thing. He called Victoria at 7:30 a.m. "I'll take it," he said. "I know," she said. "You knew I was going to accept." "I knew you were going to accept when you said you'd think about it. You only say you'll think about things when the answer is already yes, and you're being responsible about verifying it." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "You've been paying attention. You taught me it was worth doing." 6 months after the night, the window opened. Things were different in the ways that mattered, and the same in the ways that were supposed to be. Ryan still lived in the same apartment, still climbed the same 3 flights of stairs, still listened to Lily's dreams over cereal in the morning, and let himself be wholly present in the ordinary, extraordinary goodness of a life that was above everything else honest. I had more responsibility now, more complexity, more mornings where the work was difficult and the decisions were genuinely hard, and there was no backup archive that conveniently held the answer. He handled it the way he handled everything, carefully, sequentially, with the specific patience of someone who understands that the right answer is worth the time it takes to find it. Victoria still ran the company. She ran it differently with the windows open, as she described it once, meaning that she had stopped managing distance as a survival strategy and started managing it as a choice. She still had the executive voice when she needed it, and the room-quieting look, and the ability to make a difficult decision without flinching. But those were tools now, not armor. There was a difference, and the people around her felt it, even if they couldn't name it. She took 4 days off at the end of the quarter, not 2. She cooked something on one of them. She texted Ryan a photo of it. He texted back, "That looks terrible." She texted, "It was. I'm making it again next week." Lily, who had been informed in age-appropriate terms that her dad had done something important at work, and that the lady with the borrowed shoes was someone who mattered, had one question when Ryan told her the story in its outline. "Did she give your shoes back?" "She did." "Did she say thank you?" "She did, many times." Lily considered this. "Good," she said. "You should always say thank you when someone helps you." "I know, Bug. And you should help people when they need it." "I know. Even if they climb through your window." Ryan looked at his daughter. "Especially then," he said. Lily seemed satisfied with this conclusion and returned to her cereal, and Ryan sat across from her in the morning light of their small kitchen and thought about windows and baseball bats and backup archives and the specific, irreplaceable weight of a choice made in the middle of the night when no one was watching except the people who mattered most. He had spent 3 years being invisible and had turned out to be exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place. Not because the world had finally noticed him, because he had never stopped showing up as himself, even when himself was inconvenient, even when himself was costly, even when the easiest and safest and most logical thing in the world would have been to close the window, lock the door, and let someone else's problem stay someone else's problem. That was the whole of it. That was everything. A single father in a small apartment with a broken elevator and a backup archive. Nobody knew existed had looked at a cost and paid it, not because he was fearless, but because he had decided a long time ago in a hospital room holding a gap-toothed baby girl who had no one in the world but him, that the story he was going to tell with his life was going to be one she could be proud of. He had kept that promise, and in the keeping of it, without planning to, without asking for anything in return, he had changed the direction of everything. Some people move through the world quietly paying attention, doing the right thing in the small moments that no one records and no one applauds. And then one night, a window opens, and the world finds out what they are made of, and it turns out They were made of exactly what was needed all along. Ryan Mitchell was that kind of man. And he always had been.